Hi, it's Jerry Roberts. Welcome to another edition of Newsmakers Journal of the Vaccine Year. It is Sunday, March 14th, and it's later than you think because if you missed your update on daylight savings, you're already behind. We are talking today. Santa Barbara's political and media worlds were buzzing all weekend about a new piece just out from LA Magazine called In Sleepy Santa Barbara, a City Hall insider raises eyebrows. And we're joined today by the author of that piece, Mitchell Kriegman, who joins us from near Lisbon, Portugal. Mitchell, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Um, Mitchell has had a very illustrious career as a television screenwriter, fiction writer, performer. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Go to his Wikipedia entry if you want to see all that. But he has more recently turned to journalism, and that's what we're talking about today. Mitchell, it's a 4,000 word piece. There's a lot of moving parts to it. I know you worked on it for a long time, but can you summarize what the piece says?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's really about what a lot of cities in California are struggling with is the kind of what I call the angels and devils of cannabis and how one cultivates and distributes it and the good things and the bad things and and the in between and the mischief that can happen. But it's really asking a lot of questions more than it is, a definitive evaluation of it. It's really an investigation, I think.
Yeah. And you do trace the process by which the city awarded these three retail dispensary licenses. And that was a process that I would say was not really marked by transparency.
Right.
And the through line of the piece, though, is Anthony Wagner, who is the PIO for the Santa Barbara Police Department, among other tasks that he has assigned. Who came when former Chief Lori Lunau was here, and a lot about him. I got to tell you, that as I mentioned, I was on the phone from 8 o'clock yesterday morning till 8 p.m. last night with people about this piece. Really, a lot of talk and a lot of reaction to it, both positive and negative. So I want to go through some of it and play the devil's advocate somewhat about what I'm hearing and let you know
Sure.
what some of the feedback is. So first of all, I thought you were still at the Montecito Journal and that you were working on this story because it was kind of an open secret that you had these uh, uh, Public Record Act requests and so on, a lot of documents that you got for it, emails and so on. But it ended up in LA Magazine. What can you talk about your relationship with the Journal at all?
Oh, I love the journal. And I obviously wrote, I mean, when the quarantine happened, I knuckled down and decided to work for Gwen. And
Gwen Lurie, the
Gwen
editor.
Lurie and Tim, and I love it. And it was great. It was just I always feel like I really got a lot out of the quarantine because I was able to dig in and do that and find a way to do something I'd done. I'd written some for the Independent as well. And I've been in many magazines, but really I dug in and I was leaving. And so, the piece, we talked a lot about it with Gwen. I think she has a real passion for the piece and they, definitely were interested in supporting it. But I think as the piece got bigger and bigger and took longer and longer and I, moved away, it didn't, I had to look around and see what else I was going to do with it. And then I also think that there's a value in publishing in someplace outside of the city the story's about, because I feel like it allowed me to be a little more universal in the story. I mean, not that it's a universal story; it's very much about Santa Barbara, but I found that people can read the story even if they don't live in Santa Barbara and find it interesting and find something in it. And so I really liked that I was able to change my scope slightly and be slightly outside to do it. And LA Magazine was a great, enormous opportunity. And Mayor Roshan, I don't know if you know Mayor, but he's published a lot of stuff over the years, and I had written for him in the past. And he took to the story. It took a long time, even after they took to the story, because it was really had to be scrupulously resourced and proven and written in a way that would hold up.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a quick process.
Yeah. Well, and I did talk to Gwen yesterday, and she said that I guess at the point when you left for Portugal, she still wasn't comfortable with the draft or whatever form it was in, and she wanted to, I guess, pair you up with another reporter who was on the ground there, and you just decided mutually to part ways on the story.
Yeah, it wasn't. There was no negativity about it, and I like all the reporters there. Nick Shue is, I think, who she's talking about. He's terrific, and uh, and so I, no, it just started to become something that maybe I was aware more than Gwen at that moment was going to be bigger. And but I got to do many stories that really uh, I developed a process for there, because I wrote these city stories there.
Right.
There were a lot about architecture and other things and city and COVID. And that's sort of what I like to do is I like to piece together lots of information in a big canvas. And not everybody will let you do that. I mean, and Gwen was just amazing about giving me the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I got to say, it's very beautifully written piece, and
Oh, thank you.
cinematic, and people are poking holes at certain assertions, but it's a nice a job of writing. Now,
Thank you.
one of the things is, there's some main characters from the city administrator Paul Casey, former police chief Lori Lunow, and Anthony Wagner, the PIO, and you weren't able to speak with them. There's no quotes from them. What was the story with that on the other
I
side?
actually tried a lot. I went through direct email. I went through questions in emails. I went through the attorney, the city attorney. There were multiple attempts to talk to everybody.
And what response did you get? What did they say?
Um, let's see. Uh, Well, I characterize it in the story basically. But basically, I mean, mostly the spokesperson became Ariel, the city attorney, and there
Oh,
was a
wow.
no comment, and they weren't going to comment, and he included everybody in that, his response. He spoke for everybody,
So he
seemingly.
was speaking for all the city officials that you wanted to talk to.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it wasn't any official statement that he was, but everybody was. All this was done on email, and it was all documented, and everybody, was copied and everything, and it was very specific. I was very specific because I was concerned that it would be difficult to talk to people about it, and so I think everybody knew very much what I was working on and trying to find out about. Besides. I guess those super secret public information requests I was making, the the questions
It is
that
a
I was
small town, Mitchell.
the questions I asked were very delineated and clear, and I was happy to get responses in writing. I was happy to talk on the phone, and I asked all those things.
Yeah, yeah. Did you get any sense from the city attorney or any comment about why they weren't going to comment about if were they citing, some legal prohibition about discussing these matters or anything?
Well, they weren't saying why they weren't going to talk to me particularly, but the charter, and I forget the number part of the charter, but I mentioned in the article, the charter is cited frequently in discussions that I had about talking about city employees. And I think that was a theme. But I can't say there was a specific hard and fast response because there wasn't really a response, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Um, was there, did the magazine do fact checking on this? People have asked me.
Well, yeah, I mean, they have fact checkers and they had, you know, I think they did a very thorough um, job on it.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So let me just tell you a couple of things that I've heard that people are pushing back on your piece about, and since you're not here to hear it for yourself, but I mean, this is kind of a silly thing, but in the second paragraph, you describe Santa Barbara as a Gentile place. I
I know
assume.
it's genteel.
How could that happen? How could that?
I don't know. I apologize for that. Gentiles. I mean, that's not. No, I've been.
I got some very funny Facebook comments about that because
Oh
I
yeah,
posted your piece thing.
I got nailed on that. It's all my fault. I don't have a good answer for that.
All
It's a
right.
mea culpa for sure.
Yeah, I know. It's okay. Actually, a couple of Jewish friends of mine posted on there. Boy, you're not kidding. So
Well, hopefully because it's online, because I even got, you know, a little bit of a word about it. So I hopefully it'll be
all
corrected.
right. All right.
Genteel. I think genteel is appropriate.
Yes, yes. No, I
Okay.
agree. I certainly agree with that. Let me jump to the sort of ahead of the story, but basically, after you tell the tale of how these licenses came to be awarded and the key figures who were involved in doing that and so on, uh, last year, one of the three licenses, which was for Upper State Street, I don't know, 3954 State or something like that, which was awarded after this excruciatingly long and involved process of applications being scored and so on. The people who got the license never opened a retail outlet. In fact, they flipped the license. They sold it to a company that's based in Florida for unclear, nobody knows exactly how, but at
Right.
least several $1 million more than they had put into it. And lo and behold, the city council and others say, wait a minute, we didn't know these were transferable. That to me is what really jumped out of that story as what the heck happened? How did that happen?
Well, I can't say for sure how it happened, but it took a long time to discover how it could happen. Meaning that I think it clearly says, I mean, obviously everybody can look at these ordinances eventually. They weren't publicly displayed. I don't know what the process for that was, but it took me a while to really get the ordinances and look at them. And the city ordinances say it's non-transferable, but it goes on to say that an appeal can be made to transfer it, and that it's the city administrator's decision. I've heard since that the council was supposed to be consulted, and I quote Kristen
Madden, yeah.
Eden, who said they weren't consulted, and that's the understanding that I have based on talking to her. But it's confusing because Santa Barbara County, for instance, says it's non-transferable, and it is in fact non-transferable. And frequently in California, and mostly I would say it's the rule of thumb, is that these ordinances and these licenses are administered and and awarded with an outside organization. I forget the names of the companies. Mooney is one of them, who I think was involved in the transfer. But there's a number of these. It's interesting. They're accounting firms. They're accounting firms essentially for city governments, and they've specialized in evaluating and awarding these licenses. And most cities, and I think that's accurate, um, don't do it from the ground up themselves and don't do it themselves. They do it with this for the very specific reason to avoid conflicts of interest.
Yeah. Well, what do we got? 435 cities or something in California. I think actually 2/3 or 3/4 of them probably decided not to allow cannabis within their city limits after Proposition 64 passed in 2016. And of those, I think there's a mix of those that do and don't. But yeah, that's what really popped out at me on the piece. Now, so let's go through some of the players. Paul Casey, the city administrator, as you point out, had the authority to allow that transfer, I guess. And he has a lot of authority. He's a city manager. We have a city manager, a form of government. But one of the things that I wondered about, you do list his salary and say he makes more than the governor. And I wondered if that's the fairest comparison, because when you look at other administrators, particularly in state government, I mean, these guys make $450,000, $500,000. So I'm not sure that was an apples to apples comparison. But um, what was your take on what was going on? Oh, let me back up. I'm sorry. I meant to mention
No
this
worries.
about the flip lease, because Josh Molina did some reporting about this for Newshawk, I think back
Right.
in June. And he was unable to really pin down the two things. One, the exact amount that was of the transaction. Were you able to figure out how much that lease flipped for?
Um, no, because I can't tell you for sure what it was for. It's not public. It wasn't required to be public, apparently. Um, no one, which also is interesting. I mean, why wouldn't that be transparent? And the city doesn't get a piece of it.
Right,
I mean, this
right.
is a huge amount of money, and it's not really clear why it doesn't go to square one and get reevaluated from scratch. And or the last the company right before, that didn't get the license, why wouldn't that one move up to the next? It was scored right. The whole process from that point of view is not transparent and not very clear. And but at the same time, I had a number of sources that I worked with um, to find out, in within the industry, what the estimate was. And and in the article I mentioned that some people estimated as much as $7 million
That they would have paid to
paid
to the
to flip
licensee
to the
that
people that
the
had it that
city of
didn't
Santa
open the
Barbara.
store. Yeah.
Nice work if you can get it. All right. Well, let me switch gears then, because the guy who was in the middle of it was Anthony Wagner, the PIO, and for that. And you suggest that he had connections to two of the guys who were on the original license that flipped, and their names are Micah Anderson
Right.
and another guy called Knopf,
Yeah.
Knopf. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're both from San Diego. What were the connections?
Well, when you let's take the first one, is that Anthony Wagner started a group. I don't have the name in front of me right now, but a weed uh, um, cultivation advocacy group. And he started that group with Micah Anderson.
And that was about 2016, I guess, 2017.
Yeah, 16 or 17. And I mean, I didn't find some hidden papers about this. This is, you can see that right now. You can go online and find it. And and so he was already involved with, on some level, with Micah Anderson in that organization, and they were, as far as I can tell, legit, advocacy group. And Micah Anderson is in partners with Adam Knopf, and so and then further. uh, Anthony Wagner was appointed to the Planning Commission in San Diego.
He
And
came
in
from
the
San
planning,
Diego, yeah.
yeah, in San Diego. And the planning, so this is all down in San Diego. And the Planning Commission was regularly evaluating licenses for especially the medical marijuana establishments. And those guys are very active down there. So these were all people that came before that organization, the planning board. And in at least one instance, there Mr. Wagner, I would say advocated. I think it's legit to say advocated or supported a particular allowance for Adam Knopf's establishment.
Again,
So
in San Diego, though.
all in San Diego.
Yeah.
All of it was in San Diego. So I had to really try to figure out what was going on in San Diego as best I could. And again, these planning commission minutes are public record available, and so when you start looking at all that stuff, it's pretty easy to see a number of connections. I mean, San Diego isn't that big a town.
Right. So fast forward to 2018, I guess 2 years, and Knopf and Anderson are one of the applicants to the city, one of, I don't know how many, 10, 12 applicants for these licenses for retail. Were you
Right.
able to ascertain um, if Mr. Wagner disclosed this to the city or to the city attorney, or if it came up in a background check that he underwent before he was hired by the city?
No, I mean, I couldn't get any kind of background check. I mean, I think that's private. I don't think I mean, usually public officials, from my understanding, is that if you're a public official, your background check can be accessed. But he was protected by being in the police department. And whether that's the right way it should have been handled or not, I don't know. But that made it inaccessible, his background check.
So he did have a background check before he was hired?
Yeah, they don't call it a background check. It's a recommendation to hire. And so, like anybody in the city, and they hire usually it's a former police official to do these checks. And so the check was, like I say, it's a recommendation to hire rather than a background check. And the idea is that they're assessing whether this person should be hired. And all I was able to ascertain from a number of sources is that Mr. Wagner's check was one of the biggest, longest checks they had ever done. And there is a considerable number of sources who say that the check did not go well and that it was not a recommendation to hire.
Okay. And you say, because what I understand is that the background check produces what's called findings, not a recommendation to hire, and there's
Right,
no appeal
exactly.
process. But you said that Chief Lori Lunow, and again, this is what I'm getting from friends of hers, that there was no recommendation to overrule and no appeal. So there was no city manager decision to back up.
Well, I couldn't get the answers to some of these things. I mean, I don't know if she's saying that there was no recommendation, there was some evaluation. Let's call
Yeah,
it evaluation
yeah,
for a
there
moment.
was. I think everybody agrees on that.
Yeah, there was some evaluation. The understanding I have from numerous sources was that it did not go well. And I don't know about an appeal, but my understanding was overruled. He was hired regardless
Do you
of
know
the
why
finding.
it didn't go well?
Well, if you don't see the findings, how could you know? I mean, I think there are things. that, in the article that you could look at and say, well, I don't know, what about this, what about that? But I can't possibly know what was the trigger. If we could see the findings, we'd know, but there are a number of things, and I obviously asked for those, but I was unable to get them.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then the process by which the licenses were awarded, and again, not a lot of transparency in there, so it's kind of hard to tell. But there was a scoring system
Right,
that was put in place, and there were various point categories about whether they had the capital and whether they were
right.
local and whether they were all, I don't know, 4 or 5 categories. And did, did Wagner make those decisions on his own?
Well, there was a group that, from my understanding, and when you look at some of the emails, you see a number of people on this group where they go back and forth about the licenses. And it included someone from the city administrator's office. It included someone from the attorney's office. Obviously, it all was reported back to the attorney and the city manager. It included Anthony Wagner. And at different points, there's a number of other people that seem to have been on this process. and but clearly, and it was reported in other, in the Independent, for instance, that, Anthony was really running this committee, and he was the spokesperson for it, and he's the one that spoke about it. I don't think other people did at all. Um, so, and it wasn't really clear, which I also tried to find out more about. I mean, basically, this is a bundle of questions. And an attempt to try to get to the answers as best I could, given, like you mentioned, a lack of transparency. So, Anthony was hired, as far as I can understand, as the public information officer, and how he became the person in charge of the license dispensary license awards. Maybe there was an official moment where that happened, but it just never seemed clear how that happened. So I was sort of super interested in that. But clearly at some point he was put in charge of it. And by his own, admissions, he was, running it, and he considered it, really a great process. He was quoted several times about the process.
But just so I can be, I understand this, and maybe it hasn't, it isn't clear, but the scoring was done not by him unilaterally, but by the committee. Is that correct?
I assume so. I mean, basically, I did get to see the scoring cards, and you can see them. There's not a lot of work product. I requested the work product. You know what I mean by,
Yeah, yeah,
let's see the notes. Okay, so it gets 100 here. Why is this 100 and not 50? And why is this one this? There was never an ability to see the actual process in action, or even the record of it. It was just the flat out numbers. And so that, when you see numbers like that, it seems quite arbitrary, why this one's awarded that and versus that, another one. But my assumption is that the committee worked together. The committee, as best as I can assume, I don't really know, but that, and that they reported back to the city administration, because in the end, um, whether Anthony was running the process, or, whatever role Tava and
okay,
Matt,
well, yeah, the deputy city attorney.
yeah, whatever they had as in the process, it's the attorney and the city manager that, put the seal of approval on it. I mean, it doesn't get done without them. At least I don't understand how it could.
Yeah. Well, here's what I'm trying to get at. Because as a reader, when I went through the piece, the question that occurred to me, okay, if he is unilaterally making this decision, and people that he knows from a previous incarnation get a license and then they flip the license. I mean, what's going on there? Were you able to, I mean, did that, obviously that question occurred to you. Were you
Right.
able to answer that?
No, not to the point where I could definitively, write that answer, but it does beg the questions. I mean, this is what it's a process of questions being raised. So, he's certainly nominally in charge of it. He's not the final judgment of it. I don't know that he unilaterally. There's nothing to say that he did it unilaterally, but but associates that he has relationships with. And I'm not the only person that there were members of the city council who were concerned about this.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole issue of, let's take a step back. Dispensary licenses are worth a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
The city will hopefully make some money from it, and people want the product, right? And this is a highly prized, lobbied, and applied for opportunity that can result in a lot of money for good business. Well, that is something that happens in a city that really should be rather transparent, it seems to me. And any connections that are questionable should be vetted and should be easily answered, right? And in fact, it's not. It hasn't been answered. It hasn't been, I mean, it may have been vetted. Maybe they did an investigation, but I also requested any investigation, and they wouldn't share the results with me.
So nothing publicly available about any vetting or backgrounding or any disclosure that he might have made or anything else.
Right. There wasn't anything saying that okay, so there's nothing that said that he knew them and did, let's just theoretically say, special due diligence to make sure everything was, uh, completely on the, as if he didn't know them. You know what I mean? I'm not being very articulate there, but basically the process is pretty much a black box. It's
Yeah.
not a publicly available process. And then you've got these other issues like the license being flipped, the new organization, it's not clear how they were not vetted by the same process. That's also interesting, right? I mean,
What is it called? Juicy?
Juicy, like sushi.
Juicy. Yeah, Juicy. Who,
Sushi.
and that's the Florida company
Right,
that bought the license, the
right,
third license that never
right,
opened the place. Okay.
right. And
Yeah.
you've got, it's not just, all of these licenses have partners. Some of these are very complicated transactions. They have partners, they sell pieces. There's trading going on in the process of this.
Yeah.
And, and I'm not the only one that's written about it. I think Nick wrote a piece not too long ago that I thought really started revealing that there were other issues with some of the other licenses. So it's just not clear is the thing you can say definitively. And then when you have people who know other people that are in the process, when you have a scoring system, and then so why did they stop using this system when they awarded it to Juicy? It's just not clear.
Yeah, and I should say, I reached out to Anthony Wagner. He's not talking about in response to the piece. I know Anthony. I've dealt with him professionally, but he's not talking publicly about this. I did. A friend of his, says that he's not very happy, as you might expect, but. Um, and you did compare him to a guy in The Godfather at one point, which I thought was kind of tipping your pitches there a little bit, Mitchell, on that phrase.
Well, it was an interesting phone call that uh, it was an interesting phone call. I was I was writing at the time about the budget, the first COVID budget. And I had really tried to get some of the council members and the city government to respond about it because that was a big deal, if you recall. You know, they had just let go 400 or 500 people. um, how the budget was going to be allotted because the money was changing, and there still are several movements about, you know, the sensitive issue of people's salaries and how these kind of low-level people were being cut, but were there going to be other cuts? And there were a lot of questions about that, and I was trying to, you know, get some of them answered. And you know, and I got a phone call, and it was, you know, it was an interesting call, and it just made me sort of wonder what was the what was going on.
Yeah. All right. The the other issue on Wagner is this incident that took place at the 7-Eleven on Milpas Street,
Right.
uh, in which with a gentleman named Mr. Trujillo, a barber who has a little shop there. Um, there was a verbal confrontation, at least in the line at the 7-Eleven. I guess Wagner, who's in charge of permitting and regulations for alcohol and tobacco and other things, was questioning the fellow who was at the cashier, and then there was a line, and Mr. Trujillo objected, and there was words exchanged, and I guess Trujillo filed a complaint, which was with the city, which was sustained.
Right.
Uh, so you interviewed Trujillo, correct, about
Yes.
what went down? Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know if that's the same description of what happened that he put into his formal request to the or a formal complaint to the city?
Yes, I saw the complaint. I saw the sustained complaint, and I interviewed him. And my understanding, I mean, did I see the, yeah, my understanding was that it was accurate.
Yeah, because he basically said that, Wagner made a move on him, or Anthony's a tall guy, that he came after him and flashed a badge or something like that. But I think that the finding uh, itself may have been different than the circumstances that he described. Were you able to compare those two things? I guess.
No, I guess I wasn't. I don't, I mean, I saw the sustained complaint.
And do you know what it was sustained? I mean, what was sustained? What was he? Uh, what was the complaint found to address in terms of his behavior?
Well, I don't know the literal words in the complaint right now. I'd have to go back and look. But I saw, and it was sustained by the police chief, and it was signed by her. And there were also messages to, which I also saw, from the mayor and from the city administrator, reassuring George, and and basically apologizing for the behavior.
Okay, all right. Um, I want to talk a little bit about the chief, or the former chief, who's now retired last month, down in San Diego. Again, you address this issue of the salary, and that it seemed like high. But I looked at some comparable city salaries, and she's actually sort of in the lower third of that. If you look at other cities, Santa Monica, some others, it didn't seem like her salary was that high to me. I don't know. What did you take away? Culver City, the chief makes 518,000. Manhattan Beach 443,000, Santa Monica 419, Berkeley 432. She's at 392. That's a total compensation package. I mean, I think the city has a process by which they compare comparable salaries from cities. But you seem to indicate you thought it was, I think, extraordinarily high.
No, I thought that the salaries are sizable salaries. I think to most people they seem, pretty high. And so I don't really have more to say about it than that. And it's not really it's not about my judgment. It's more about, look at the numbers. And when I looked at the numbers, and I don't know the numbers you're talking about, I saw that the numbers for many people in the city are quite high.
Yeah,
I don't think that's a singularly held belief, you
yeah.
know?
The and then you mentioned that she took 3-day weekends, but all city employees are required to take every other weekend as they call it Black Friday because it's a budget thing. So that was not unusual either.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I tried to get more information. I did see the time cards, and I tried to get more information specifically related to the various, and there have been many crises, that have occurred. We all know the mudslides, the fires, and I wasn't able to get, I went directly to try to get answers to those. I had interviewed people who had remarked about absences and things like that. But the article isn't really written about her. It's really sort of more about, honestly, it's more about the overall atmosphere of things not being transparent and clear and buttoned up. It just seems like things beg questions on what is the mechanism for accountability. It just that seems like the overall thing. It's not so much, honestly, it's not so much Anthony Wagner or one thing or the other. It's this sort of general kind of sense that you can't talk about it, and the city won't be transparent about it, and even the information requests sometimes are highly redacted. So it's not really, meant to like lay the blame at anybody's feet as much as it is to say, look, what is this process that Santa Barbara lives in?
Well, and here's the other point, Mitchell, that I've written a fair amount about the county ordinance and looked at that. And as you know, there was a very, very damning grand jury report about
Right.
that. And, they basically opened the floodgates for marijuana cultivation. Somehow, virtually overnight, Santa Barbara becomes, the capital of marijuana cultivation in California, or one of them anyway. And then we have this issue with the licenses in the city, and it just seems like this whole issue of, okay, Proposition 64 passes in 2016. Fast forward 5 years, and now we have this massive new industry in Santa Barbara County, which is uh, driving our politics to a certain extent, our economy. The wine, the vintners are up in arms about this. The way that industry. So, I think if you look at it from 25,000 feet, there's really, this is part of that story.
I agree. Yeah, that's why I say it's like the angels and devils of marijuana cultivation, legal marijuana. And Joe Mazingo in LA
The LA
wrote
Times
that
guy.
piece. Yeah, he wrote a great piece. And I don't remember the numbers exactly, but it's something like, 23% of the cultivation in California is in Santa Barbara on 1.8% of the land, you
Yeah,
know. And then you look at what happened in the dispensary situation, millions of dollars coming in, millions of dollars even lobbying, you know, and then you have to say the same. I see what your point is, that there's things that you want to know more about, and you want to know more specifics about what is this money buying and where is it going.
yeah, yeah. And given the status of our media landscape, which is, we all are plugging away at what we're doing. But, at one time, I think the morning newspaper had something like 60 people in its newsroom looking at this. Now there's half a dozen or 10 or, maybe 12 at the top reporters in all, a whole bunch of, whether it's the Montecito Journal or the Independent or Newshawk or anything else.
There's no doubt that Josh Molina and Nick
Well,
Welsh have like tried to tackle this in all sorts of ways, and one of the kind of opportunities I have because I'm at a distance, in terms of how both my approach to the kind of material and how I write, and not being in a regular newsroom, it gives me a chance to sort of try to piece together a lot of stuff. And there's no doubt that, many pieces of this have been uncovered in one form or another by other reporters in town trying to tackle it, trying to get the information.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, Mitchell Kriegman, thank you so much for taking the time. I don't have no idea what time it is here, let alone in Lisbon, Portugal, but I appreciate it. And we hopefully we'll talk again. And congratulations on meeting Joseph Pulitzer's definition of news.
Well, I really appreciate your opportunity to talk to you and to talk about it. So I'm very grateful. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.